All right, Stephen Holly. Listen, thanks so much for being here with us. Stephen's back in Dallas, now working for the Jones Lang LaSalle. We'll get that out of the way first. That's what you're doing to make a living.
Yes.
So you've been doing that for how long, Stephen?
Started the Staubach Company back in '07.
Okay.
End of '07, so a little over 5 years. And then we were subsequently bought mid-08 by JLL.
Okay. All right, so let's just go back to the beginning. You're a Dallas guy. You're born in Dallas, right?
Born in Dallas, and there's a lot of familiar faces in here, which is nice. But born and raised in East Dallas and Lakewood, and all my family was born and raised in East Dallas. But in 9th grade, moved over to Lake Highlands and started going to Lake Highlands High School.
Into the hood, which many of us have traversed through. Some of us leave it, like Cody. Came into the hood, but left the hood. I'll drive you out of this room, too. As a matter of fact, this is your last series. Don't come back. All right, so you came up to Lake Highlands in the 9th grade. Went to Highlander, right?
Yep, went to Highlander.
Okay, some of you don't know what that is, but we have some Highlander exes here, too. So, so you came to Lake Highlands in 9th grade. There was a reason why you came, right?
You know what? Candidly, going to Highlander, a lot of the folks coming out of Highlander went either to Forest Meadow or Lake Highlands. And I'm the only member of my family, sisters, parents, and my in-laws, and she's one of 5 that didn't graduate from Woodrow Wilson. So, I always had a lot of close friends in Lake Highlands, and ultimately my parents succumbed to a lot of repeated requests, and we moved over there, beginning of high school.
Well, the football team was glad you came. So you played a little football up there. What position?
I was a quarterback up until my junior year, and for anyone that was around Lake Highlands in those years, probably one of the best players that ever came through was playing quarterback, and I wasn't going to see the field. So my senior year, I played, followed in Paul's footsteps and played free safety.
Okay. With Paul Broom. You followed with Paul Broom.
Yeah, I couldn't get on the field at free safety. So
great athletes. All right. So what was the movement to Annapolis? Why did you choose to do that?
Honestly, when I first got a call from a football coach up there, my response was, "There's no way I'm going to go to Annapolis." I had a brother-in-law who married my oldest sister that graduated the academy in '92 when I was 8th grade, 9th grade. And I got a little glimpse of what that entailed, and I thought, you know what, that's the last thing in the world I want to go do. And I stayed in contact with this coach, and he said, just come up here and take a visit. And so I did, and ended up staying with, I think some of the folks in the room today thought that Clint Bruce was coming to talk to you this morning, who's a good friend. But Clint was my host that weekend, and he went South Carolina. We had a lot of mutual friends, and any of you that know Clint or have heard him, he is a very persuasive speaker, very, very eloquent, gifted guy. Anyway, he and I hit it off right away, and flying back from Annapolis that weekend, I thought, this is the best thing I could ever do for myself, both, a great education, a phenomenal opportunity after graduating college, and then, whatever that turns into, whether it's a military career or coming back to Dallas, it's something that, after a lot of thought, was something I was drawn to.
All right. Well, it's still a lot. I mean, you're moving into an environment that's going to call a lot from you, right? Going to ask a lot of you. What kind of kid were you growing up?
I was a pretty typical guy. A lot of these folks in here have known me since I was a little kid. Nothing out of the ordinary. I love sports. Very passionate about the outdoors, hunting and fishing, and the hunting aspect of it, and just spending a lot of time was what ultimately piqued my interest in the SEAL teams while I was at the academy.
Okay. Siblings?
2 older sisters that are both back in the hood now.
Okay, awesome. Love that. And mom and dad, what's your relationship like with them?
Phenomenal relationship with both mom and dad. see them quite often, even today. They both live very close. Again, I had a really, really good childhood growing up. Unbeknownst to me at the time, there were some things going on with my mom and dad as far as their marriage was concerned. They nearly got a divorce when I was in 9th grade, and that was one of the catalysts for, hey, let's kind of start over, hit the reset button, let's move to Lake Highland. So us moving was a byproduct of some issues going on that I had limited visibility on, but ultimately, after my freshman year in college, they ended up getting a divorce. And while that's tragic, they're both remarried today, and still very, very, we socialize as one big family quite often, and they, it's very amicable.
Okay, so let's take you into Navy a little bit. What was that experience like at Annapolis?
Annapolis is an interesting place, especially as a freshman. You're up at 5 and you're in bed at 10, and throughout that day, they give you 30 hours of stuff to do in about an 18-hour day, and part of that curriculum, if you will, is figuring out how to prioritize and manage your time, because you're not going to get it all done. And so, especially playing football and the time demands that had, you grow up pretty quickly. Although my freshman year, I was as homesick as can be, which I've since learned that a lot of people, everybody goes through that, but up there in that environment really amplified it for me. But there was no way I was going to quit. So the first 2 years were an adjustment.
When you say there's no way you're going to quit, what do you mean by that?
Well, up until your
I'll be right back. Keep talking.
Yep, up until your sophomore year at the academy, you can walk away without a commitment to the Navy. But once you sit down day one of your junior year, you sit down in classes, you are financially obligated if you decide to leave and or get kicked out. So for 2 years, you get a free pass, and then once you sit down in your class, day one junior year, I don't know the exact number, but it's a couple $100,000 that you're obligated to pay back, either through writing a check or military service.
Okay, I got you. Listen, I grew up as a kid this high watching the Army-Navy games. Mm-hmm. My dad was an Army guy, so I always rooted for the Army. I'm sorry about that. So,
hadn't helped the last 12
Did
years.
you play? So did you play in those games?
I did. My freshman year, I traveled, but I didn't play. My sophomore year, I backed up a guy who was a senior who was a phenomenal triple option quarterback. We ran the same offense up there that we ran in Lake Highlands during that time frame, and so that's just a familiarity with that offense is what led me to play up there. But saw the field a little bit as a sophomore. Started as a junior at quarterback, and then 7 games in, separated my left shoulder and didn't play the rest of the year. The guy that was backing me up ended up beating me out for the position. So my senior year, I played tailback and running back, and got on the field that way.
Okay, was that a phenomenal experience though? Playing? Was that the big game? Was that y'all's big game?
Yeah, Army-Navy was. There's words can't describe what that atmosphere is like.
It's pretty cool.
So that's at the top, but right underneath that, I'll tell you my favorite memory is playing in South Bend. We played Notre Dame every year, and playing in South Bend in that environment was right below that.
I bet.
Pretty special.
It's pretty cool. Yeah. All right, so you matriculate through Navy. Obviously, you make a commitment to go in. Kind of lead us up to kind of engaging with that whole SEAL training. I mentioned the mystery word was Trident. I don't know how many of these guys got that, but tell us a little bit about the SEAL training. And I really don't want to emphasize too much just all that you did. I know you could probably regale us with story after story after story, but I want to get us through I wanted to get us into the SEAL experience.
Right.
So, what was it like to get to the point where you got the Trident? I guess
I'll give you the framework on BUDS, which there's some context there that helps, and then I'll give you a couple of revelations that I had in buds that have been, you know, light bulb moments for me, and lessons learned that I've been able to carry, you know, no matter what I'm doing. But buds is essentially, it's officially 6 months long. There's a little bit of an indoctrination phase that happens prior to officially starting buds, but broken up into 3 phases. There's a first phase, which is called basic conditioning, and it's about 8 weeks of them, you know, running you ragged 12 hours a day. And the point of basic conditioning is to figure out really how bad you want to be there. Second phase is a dive phase, and it becomes where you start to get some skills, both closed circuit scuba and open circuit scuba. And then third phase is land warfare, all the things that you typically associate with being a SEAL, all the weapons, demolition, etc. We started in dock October of 2000 with 119 guys. We started first phase 6 weeks later with 83. 2 weeks into it, we had 39 guys going into Hell Week. And Hell Week is what, you know, Buds is known for. And Hell Week starts on a Sunday and it ends sometime on Friday. And you go nonstop. And I think we got about half an hour of sleep on Wednesday and maybe 45 minutes of sleep on Thursday. But you're going 24 hours a day. You're burning between 12 and 15,000 calories a day. And so it takes a tremendous toll on your body. But Hell Week is really when you figure out who really wants to be there. And we started with 39, and by Tuesday we had 19 guys, Tuesday night. And Tuesday night was pivotal for me for a couple of reasons, because after going for 2 days, and your body's beat to a pulp. And again, the documentary shows a little bit about it, but you're in and out of the water. And Hell Week for us was the first week in December, so the water's, you know, 55 degrees, somewhere in there, maybe a little colder, but you're in and out of the water, which is the biggest thing that tests a guy's mental capability. In and out, not to mention the fact that your body's at a point where your pain threshold, your register for pain, you didn't realize it could go that high. And so Tuesday night, you're working in boat crews, 6 or 8 guys working together throughout all these different evolutions and tasks. And Tuesday night, I was at the end of, I couldn't figure out how I'm going to keep going. Although quitting was an option, I thought, I don't know how my body can keep going. And there was a guy in my boat crew, Jeff Boss, who, as bad as I was, and I was bad, I could tell something else was going on with him. And unbeknownst to me at the time, Jeff had snapped his tibia in his leg and went for 48 more hours. He ultimately went to Thursday before they pulled him out of training. But Jeff kept pushing, and it was some point Tuesday evening when I made the decision that I got to focus everything I can on Jeff, because Jeff was literally my rock. And he was one of those guys when it got real bad, you know, I would turn to him and go, holy crap, I don't know if I can get through this. But I could tell Jeff was really hurting, and so I thought, I got to get Jeff through. If I'm going to get through this, I got to have Jeff there with me. So I started focusing everything I had on getting him through. And it was through that, when I started focusing 100% of my effort on Jeff, because you got to keep in mind, human nature is self-preservation. So as you're going from evolution to evolution to evolution, it's inherent to the human body to say, you got to hold a little bit back. Because you don't know what they're going to throw at you next. You don't know what the next evolution is going to be. You can't lay everything out there time and time. So when I finally said, you know what, screw that, I got to focus on Jeff. No matter what, I'm putting everything I got into Jeff to making sure he gets through. And when I made that decision Tuesday evening, all of a sudden the pain was still there, but it wasn't at the top of my brain. And it subsided to a point where I could deal with it. And it wasn't such a glaring issue at the top of my head. It wasn't like every sensory, you know, I don't know the science of it, neuron was just screaming. All of a sudden I could deal with it. And I was focused on him And that evening in our boat crew, we didn't lose anyone else after Tuesday night. You could all see that mental switch take place, and everyone started doing that for one another. So you had 6 guys that were no longer in it for themselves to get through. They were worried about the guy next to them. And that is the essence of that training. 90% of that training is mental, although that 10% of physical is a mother. But that's where they're trying to get you mentally.
Are they up there giving the theory of this, or is this something you learn in the trench?
This is just hindsight of going through that training and seeing the guys that wash out, but ultimately seeing the guys that really gel. Once we had those 19 guys, we lost one more guy the rest of the training, all the way to graduation.
Okay, well, let's talk about this for just a second, because I love the principle of what you're talking about. Look, I tell guys all the time, I tell myself all the time, you need other people. The scriptures, and when you investigate these things, they're I don't know how many one another kind of passages there are. Love one another, help one another, encourage one another. These are all the way through the Bible. So you can have somebody scream this stuff at you, or you can learn it in the trenches, or you can have both going on. How in the world do men come to the place outside of war, like you are being trained to gel with another human being? How do guys like this, who aren't going to be SEALs, not going to go through that training, how do we figure out how to make life work together? I mean, what's your takeaway now that you're...
The takeaway is, and again, I'm not the most eloquent person. I will try to sum this up, but help me as I go along here. What I figured out there was it was about loving another guy more. You had to love him more than you loved yourself. And when you did that, and again, that training, that whole community, it was there was a lot of ego, a lot, cocky, arrogance, because the stuff that we were training to do, you had to have that mentality, but when you stripped all that away, it was guys that loved one another. And you had to love one another to be able to go do the things that, that we were asked to do. So, and what I've taken from that is I try to surround myself with guys that, and I'm lucky to work in an environment where now the guys that I work with are some of my best friends, and there's a love there where, work aside, I'd do anything in the world for them. And I think a key to walking with other guys and walking faithfully and trying to advance your faith is you gotta surround yourself with guys that at the end of the day will put you in your place if you need to, will allow you to put them in their place if they need to, but it's got to be on the basis of love.
Man, I got to tell you, we could go on for a few hours on this, and the fact that you had the privilege to learn this at such a young age is phenomenal. But man, that's big stuff right there. Now look, let's talk a little bit about, you were deployed a few times. We've actually never talked about your stories. And Stephen, I'm not asking you to tell anything you don't want to talk about. But I'm sure there were some low lows out there. I'm sure there were some times when you were confused or angry or disappointed. But somewhere I want you to engage with this question. How in the world does a guy who's trained to see evil, to face down a weapon, how in the world does a guy survive that? And I want to know what part in your life faith played.
As I reflected back, there was another, what I call, light bulb moment for me on my second deployment when I really, I had 4 total deployments while I was in the Navy. I had 2 in Southeast Asia, in and around the Philippines. There's a group down there called the Abu Sayyaf group. That's an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, and a bunch of guys that are pretty evil. And we spent some time in the Philippines chasing those guys around. And then my last 2 deployments were in Iraq in 04 and 05. And it was, the light bulb moment for me was probably my second deployment when, you go through all that training and you go through with all these guys and literally you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof coming out of there. And a part of that is your psyche to be able to go overseas and operate. But what was a turning point for me was when I really went over there and I thought, you know what? While the training is dangerous that we go through, it was an interesting revelation to think, okay, there's guys that, want my head on a platter and post it on the internet. And that coming to grips with my mortality, if you will, at a pretty young age was definitely a turning point for me in with my faith, because there's a lot of different ways guys deal with it. The guys that I was operating with dealt with it, and a lot of them were Christians, but a lot of them dealt with it in other ways. We all dealt with it in some way, shape, or form. You had to deal with it because you couldn't, your mind couldn't wander about, thinking you might die, because if you did that, you were going to be ineffective. So figuring out how to compartmentalize those kinds of feelings was paramount, and I did that. That was a big step for me with my faith, and being comfortable that ultimately, it's not up to me when my name's called. And so that was a big learning experience for me, and a turning point with in my spiritual walk.
Yeah, not many of us face down the fear of death early on like that. In fact, the more I age, the more I get in touch with, the season's coming shorter and shorter for me as I get older. But I didn't think that when I was your age or even before. So amazing that you had to force yourself into that mode to say, I've got to deal with that.
Well, and again, everyone has to deal with it. You have to, or you will be ineffective, because you can't let those thoughts bounce around.
But I think my point is, and I agree with you 100%, but my point is a lot of us when we're younger, like these men here, we don't think about mortality. Right. You were put in a position where you had to. But I try to theorize with these guys a lot to say, look, you might have 40 or 50 or 60, 70 years, but it's all going to come to an end sometime. So what are you living for? Right. It's not a point.
Absolutely.
And so it's just a good thing, a good word for you to say that, to these guys that you had to put that down. Well, Stephen, here's a question for you. Sometimes guys that go through what you went through, they have their moments with God. I mean, I'd be interested about your conversations with God. That's how I would say it. Were there times of, did you compartmentalize him and put him to the side? Or was he engaged with you? Or did you get angry about what you saw? Or when somebody was wounded or killed in your, what goes through your mind?
Well, a couple different things. I'll come back to that. But as far as compartmentalizing God and dealing with some of those issues, we didn't lose a SEAL in Iraq until 2006. And we had lost a few guys in Afghanistan, 2002 to 2005. And in fact, up until that point, it was the greatest loss of life within the history of the SEAL teams, happened in late June of 2005. And half of that task unit was deployed with us in Iraq. And so dealing with the loss was something that we did. But for me, again, it goes back to compartmentalizing. The guys that I was training with, operating with, and deploying with to Iraq specifically was a group from the West Coast and some really close friends. But again, we hadn't lost anyone. We had some guys shot, we had some guys blown up, but miraculously, no one had died. And so it wasn't until 2006, when I got out of the Navy, that shortly thereafter I started losing close friends of mine that I'd been working with. And that,
wow.
Well, that was when that's when some of those issues, when I started wrestling with, you know, that's...
Yeah, the guy thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, well, can you get that out a little bit? Because the reality of life is, okay, let me just say this while you get composure there.
Yeah.
The reality is that curveballs are going to come. Yours were, gosh, they were exacerbated. They were closed in for a period of time. But every one of these guys is going to lose somebody.
Yeah.
Going to lose a wife, lose a child, lose a friend, lose a dad, lose a mom, and not only that, but the other egregious things: lose jobs, get ill. Things are just going to happen. But you saw this in such a short period of time with people that you had grown to love. That's the point. So how in the world do you encourage these guys as they go fight their wars, as they leave the room? With what centered you in those times? And the reality is, I know it's difficult, so let me speak for you.
What I have, again, it's an ongoing process, the last 6-7 years. But a little bit of context to it. In 2005, what turned out to be my last deployment, my fourth deployment, I called home about a month into it. And my wife, we'd been married about a year. She's pregnant, about 3 weeks pregnant, or whatever the math works out. It was conceived prior to leaving. But that, for me, just completely rocked my world, because being a SEAL and deploying over and over, it was a perfect job. Because as you can imagine, war on terror, we've been training, and then bam, you get to go do what you've been trained to do. And when I found out she was pregnant, it completely turned all my priorities and my world upside down. And a lot of prayer, a lot of talking with friends and family. And I thought, you know what? I can't raise a family the way I was raised. Phenomenal upbringing with a dad that made every baseball, football, soccer, whatever practice I was there. He was there. And I thought, I can't raise a family the way I want to raise a family and continue to do this. So it was the right decision to get out, but it was an extremely tough decision. And that, coupled with starting to lose guys, really, messed with my head. And so all that's to say is, and again, I can sin with the best of them, but if it weren't for, a deliberate effort to always refocus and try to channel a lot of that anxiety, angst, etc., and deal with it positively. Believe me, my wife will tell you, I've dealt with a lot of it very negatively. But I think it's, to put all that into context for what I now deal with day to day, and for what all of you all deal with day to day in the midst of Dallas, Texas, and all the stuff that we have coming at us, it goes back to what you said earlier. It's about surrounding yourself with people that are going to love you no matter what, but they're going to hold you accountable. Because again, I can sin with the best of them, but it's been guys that, when you start to go off a cliff, pull you back over. So, I was talking to a group a couple of weeks ago, and I just shared this story. Again, it helped me a little bit in the context of dealing with all this last couple of years. But as I was preparing to talk to this group, I reflected back on the movie 300. You familiar? You guys have seen that movie with 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae, and they're going up against what people estimate today to be a couple 100,000 soldiers in the Persian army. And there's a scene in that movie where they're marching, and the Persian army shoots a bunch of arrows. And there's so many arrows that it blacks out the sun. And these 300 guys realize, holy crap, there's a lot of them over there. And they get out underneath their shield, and there's a point where there's two of them that are face to face, eye to eye. And again, the sun is blotted out because of the number of sheer volume of arrows that are in the air. But they're sitting there looking at each other, and they're smiling, and they start laughing. And that, for me, was a lot of what it was like being in the SEAL teams, because the absurdity of the situations you find yourself in, both in training and in the real world, you could only just sit there and laugh. But it also showed, again, going back to that love for one another. Those guys had each other's back, and they were eye to eye, and they were about to go die together. But as I was preparing for this talk a few weeks ago, it hit me that ultimately what God wants us to be doing as guys raising families, living our lives is we need to be surrounding ourselves with other guys that can look you in the eye and love you and have that shield of protection. And He wants us taking ground every day. And so that's been one of the biggest struggles for me is I feel like I do a pretty good job leading the family and attending church regularly and being in a small group. But where God really has convicted me and put it on my heart is, that's great. Those are baby steps. But how do you go out into the marketplace, into your job, and really continue to take ground spiritually on His behalf? And you got that shield in front of you, but you're advancing, because the enemy's going to come after you when you start doing that. And so that has been a big, that image to me, it finally, that things fell into place in my mind for that's what, being a physical warrior and being overseas, I understand that. The spiritual side, being a spiritual warrior, that image to me is where it really started to make some sense.
Awesome. Steve, you're a stud. And thank you for joining us today. And all of us would agree that we sure thank you for your service. I know you've probably heard that, but I don't think guys like me can say that enough. And I know these guys would want to say the same thing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your service.
Thanks for having me. And again, I don't sit up here and pretend like I've got it figured out. Lord knows that I don't, but I think it's important to again, surround yourself with guys that are at least that you can give accountability to, and that will be there to rein you in, because as guys, we're going to need it.
It's a absolutely essential and obviously powerful message, really big. It reminds me that, you see this in Genesis chapter 1. It says that the earth was created formless and void. It was in darkness. And what you notice throughout all the Bible is you notice that when God moves, He always moves into chaos, into darkness, i.e. evil, and He orders it. And you know what He's looking for? He's looking for Stephen Hollies. He's looking for guys like me. He's looking for guys like Ryan. He's looking for us as men to stand up, look at the chaos of life, what's chaotic. There's lots of relational brokenness out there. You see it every day. Not only between you and the boss, between you and your colleagues, between you and your wife, between you and your brother or father or mother. There's chaos everywhere. Well, will you look at it? Will you look at the chaos, look at the darkness, what's evil about it, in other words, what's not of God, and then go try to reorder it. But you cannot do that alone. And what makes it fun, I think, what you miss so much, as we've had conversations in the past, moving from what Stephen moved to back into the civil world, into the South part, is as good as that is, and back with Molly and their children, as wonderful as all that is, there's still a component of life that you still yearn for, isn't it? And that is that element of love of the brother.
Yep. That was my perfect world, perfect job.
Yeah.
And when you rip away the camaraderie, the adrenaline, the satisfaction, job satisfaction, and you rip away that tight bond, it's
Can you get it again? But I think you can, because there's chaos out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you fought it tangibly and observably, but there's chaos all beside us as men. And the question is, what are we going to do? We can be passive, watch it go by. We can have mediocre stories. See, what I love about good men and good story is they look at the chaos and they enter it. Why? Because it's conflictual. It's facing down the stuff in us that doesn't like it, that's fearful about it, that gets confused, even compartmentalizing God. It's all of that, because life is not, it just doesn't comport this easy thing. If it does, you're probably not living in much conflict or risk. And so what I love about what Stephen did, not only in war, but what he's trying to do today, is look it down again and find some guys who are willing to go through with him. Which is a perfect segue to say, look, these small groups are not to catch me out, but if you're not in one, you should be. And let me just give you that challenge. If you're not in something today that's giving you the idea to kick at life hard and to kick at God hard and to find some other guys that will do it with you, well, then you should be. And then what you put into that small group, you know, it doesn't just happen, does it, Stephen? What you put into it to come to the end of your rope and you say, I've got to love this guy, or I'm not going to make it. That's when you know you've arrived. And Stephen's had the privilege to get to that place with some guys, and it's still, you can see it's in him. I mean, all of a sudden he bubbles up and his chin begins to quiver a little bit. Why? Because it's so important to him. And I want you guys to find that here. I'm not just talking about here, but on this life, with some guys that you lock arms with and say, let's do it together. So, Stephen, you've been a great encouragement, a great model. Again, we thank you for being here. I'm just going to close with a word of prayer. And the next week, by the way, the mystery guest, suave, debonair, handsome, brilliant, and a great athlete. Figure that one out. Yeah. Extremely humble. All right. Hey, Father, thank you for the time together today. Thank you for Stephen and his story, and the fact that he had the courage to move into the chaos of life. And whatever drove him that way, Father, whether it was ego or pride or abilities, whatever, the fact that you brought him into that place where he came to a place where he said, you know what, I can't do it alone. And I thank you for his service and his testimony and the fact that he kept you centered in his life. And the story's still being unpacked as he loves Molly and their children well. So we sure pray for him as he continues to go forward. For these men, Father, I pray that you'd help us be men. Help us be men that look at the chaos of life and enter into it. Give us good conflict that we might have resolve for, that we might say, I know what to do. So help these men go from this place and be better equipped for it. In the name of Jesus today.